April 11, 1945, 14 o'clock hours. Near the banks of the Werra River, central Germany. The air doesn't just smell like smoke. It tastes like pulverized brick and scorched diesel. You're standing on a muddy ridge, and the ground beneath your boots isn't just vibrating, it's screaming. Below, a column of M4 Shermans, painted with the white star of the U.S. Third Army, is tearing through the German countryside at a pace that defies every manual ever written on armored warfare. At the head of this steel gale is a man who looks less like a general and more like a vengeful god of antiquity. He wears high-polished cavalry boots and a pair of ivory-handled revolvers strapped to his hips. This is George S. Patton, Jr., and right now, he isn't just fighting the Wehrmacht. He is racing the clock, the map, and a man sitting 1,000 miles to the east in the Kremlin. In Moscow, inside the thick, cold walls of the Kremlin, Joseph Stalin stares at a map of Europe. His finger traces the red line of the Red Army, pushing relentlessly from the east. But his eyes are fixed on the blue line screaming in from the west. To Stalin, the Americans were supposed to be industrialists, not warriors. They were supposed to be slow, methodical, and bogged down by logistics. But Patton has shattered that illusion. In the last 72 hours, the Third Army has covered ground that should have taken weeks. Stalin turns to General Antonov, his chief of staff. He doesn't ask about the British or the French. He asks about the cowboy. "Where is Patton?" Stalin growls. Antonov hesitates. The truth is, the Stavka, the Soviet High Command, doesn't exactly know. Patton is moving so fast that his own headquarters is struggling to keep up. He's bypassing cities, outrunning his supply lines, and ignoring the stop orders from his superiors. For the first time since the war began, Stalin feels a flicker of something he hasn't felt in years, genuine concern. He isn't worried about Patton losing. He's worried about Patton winning too much. If Patton reaches the Elbe River before the Red Army can consolidate its hold on Berlin and Prague, the post-war map of Europe, the one Stalin has already spent millions of Soviet lives to secure, could evaporate in a cloud of American exhaust. You can see it in the way Stalin grips his pipe. This isn't just a military coordination problem anymore. It's a collision of two unstoppable forces. One is a massive grinding steamroller of Soviet infantry. The other is a lightning-fast, unpredictable cavalier who has publicly stated he'd rather keep driving until he hits Moscow. The orders from the Kremlin are hushed but urgent. Watch him. Track every mile. Do not let the Americans accidentally cross the line. Because while the world thinks the war is ending, for Stalin and Patton, a new, much more dangerous shadow play is just beginning. And the first accident is about to happen on a bridge that wasn't supposed to exist. April 14, 1945. Soviet Forward Command Post, near the Oder River. The map on the table is a mess of grease pencil and sweat. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, the man who saved Moscow and broke the back of the Wehrmacht at Stalingrad, stares at the latest intelligence report. It's a smudge of blue ink moving east fast. Too fast. They are not stopping for fuel, Zhukov mutters to his aides. In the Soviet School of War, logistics are a god. You build a railhead. You stockpile millions of shells. You move in a massive, unstoppable tide. You do not simply drive. But George Patton is doing the impossible. He is bypassing German strongpoints, leaving pockets of tens of thousands of enemy troops in his wake, and trusting his rear guard to clean it up later. To the Soviet mind, this isn't just reckless. It's suspicious. Visual. A split screen showing the methodical, heavy movement of Soviet T-34s versus the chaotic, high-speed dash of American Hellcat tank destroyers. Stalin receives the report in his dacha. He's a man built on paranoia, and to him, Patton's speed looks like a calculated provocation. He suspects that Eisenhower and Marshall are giving Patton a long leash to see just how much of the Soviet zone he can swallow before the diplomatic ink dries. You can almost feel the temperature in the Kremlin drop as Stalin realizes his leverage is leaking away. Every kilometer Patton gains is a kilometer Stalin can use as a bargaining chip at the upcoming peace conferences. But there's a deeper fear. Stalin remembers 1919. He remembers the Western intervention during the Russian Civil War. He looks at Patton and doesn't see an ally finishing off Hitler. He sees the vanguard of a new enemy. He sees a general who has openly stated that the U.S. Army should kick the Mongols back to the steppes. Suddenly, the accidental clashes start. High above the German countryside, a flight of Soviet Yak-3 fighters spots a column of dust. In the heat of the moment, with nerves frayed and recognition manuals useless at 300 miles per hour, the Soviet pilots dive. They see tanks. They see movement. They open fire. The white stars on the roofs of the Shermans are obscured by the very dust Patton says speed has kicked up. Ground fire bellows back. In a matter of seconds, the Grand Alliance is firing on itself. Tracers bridge the gap between two ideologies that haven't yet realized they are at war. When the smoke clears, a Soviet fighter is down and several American trucks are burning. The reports filter back to Stalin. His reaction isn't anger, it's a cold, calculating realization. Patton isn't just a threat to the Germans. He is a variable that Stalin cannot control. If Patton continues this relentless momentum, he won't just meet the Red Army. He will collide with it. And Stalin knows that in a head-on collision between a steamroller and a lightning bolt, the entire world might catch fire. The order is sent out to the Soviet front commanders. Prepare for contact. Not with the Germans, but with the Americans. And if Patton crosses the demarcation line, do not be the first to blink. But George Patton has never blinked in his life. And he has just spotted a prize that Stalin considers his own personal trophy, the city of Prague. May 4th, 1945, 3 o'clock hours. 3rd Army Tactical Command Post near the Czechoslovakian border. The interior of the command trailer is thick with the blue haze of Lucky Strike cigarette smoke and the frantic clicking of a teletype machine. General George S. Patton Jr. stands over a map of Central Europe, his eyes bloodshot from a lack of sleep. To anyone else, the map looks like a victory lap. To Patton, it looks like a tragedy in the making. His finger rests on Prague. The Golden City is the last jewel of Central Europe. More importantly, it is a strategic crossroads. If the Americans take it, they hold the keys to the post-war Balkans. If the Soviets take it, the Iron Curtain, a term Patton is already beginning to whisper, will drop firmly across the heart of the continent. "We can be there in 24 hours, Patton says, his voice a gravelly rasp. "The Germans are falling over themselves to surrender to us. They'd rather give the city to a gentleman than a commissar, but the teletype machine isn't sending news of a green light. It's spitting out a stop order from Supreme Allied Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower. The Yalta Agreement, a deal struck in the shadows between Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, has already partitioned Europe. Prague, according to the ink on the parchment, belongs to the Soviet sphere. Across the lines, Stalin is not sleeping either. He is receiving hourly updates on Patton's position. He knows that Patton is currently closer to Prague than the Red Army's spearheads under Marshal Konev. Stalin's paranoia, usually reserved for his own generals, is now focused entirely on the American Third Army. Stalin doesn't just see Patton as a fast general. He sees him as a political arsonist. He has read the intelligence reports Patton's loud, profanity-laced tirades about how we're fighting the wrong enemy and how the U.S. should keep the tanks rolling all the way to the Volga. To Stalin, Patton is the physical manifestation of the capitalist crusade he has feared since 1917. If Patton enters Prague, Stalin believes the Americans will never leave. He believes the accidental clashes of the previous weeks weren't accidents at all, but Patton probing Soviet strength. Stalin sends a terse, cold message to Eisenhower. It isn't a request. It's a demand for clarification. He reminds the Americans of the agreed-upon lines. He is testing Eisenhower's resolve to control his most unruly thoroughbred. In the mud of Czechoslovakia, you can feel the tension in the very air. American GIs, bolstered by the thrill of the hunt, are looking east, wondering why the hell they're being told to put the brakes on. They see the smoke of the Red Army's artillery on the horizon. They are so close they can hear the faint thud of Soviet Katyusha rockets. "General," an aide whispers, Eisenhower is adamant. "We are not to advance beyond the Pilsen line." Patton's face turns a shade of crimson that matches his general's stars. He knows something the politicians don't or won't admit. He knows that every mile he concedes today is a mile that will be paid for in blood during a Cold War he can already feel beginning. He grabs the phone. He doesn't call Eisenhower. He calls General Omar Bradley. "Brad," Patton growls, "I've got a feeling my radio is going to break for the next 12 hours. We're going to have a little navigational error and find ourselves in the outskirts of Prague before anyone can tell us otherwise. It is a moment of pure, historical electricity." Patton is prepared to defy the Supreme Command, risk a court-martial, and potentially spark a global conflict between the two greatest powers on Earth just to stop Stalin's shadow from lengthening. But Stalin isn't just watching the maps. He has moved his own checkers into place. As Patton prepares to cut the leash, he doesn't realize that the Soviet First Ukrainian Front has just received orders to ignore their own exhaustion, ignore their supply lines, and sprint toward Prague at a suicidal pace. The race is no longer against the Nazis. It is a race between two allies who have become rivals, fueled by the ego of a general who won't stop and the fear of a dictator who won't be denied. And then, the radio in Patton's trailer crackles to life with a report that changes everything. The voice on the other end of the radio isn't a frantic scout or a celebratory commander. It's the cold, measured tone of a USSR liaison officer. They are being slaughtered in the streets and are broadcasting a desperate, repeating plea on open frequencies. Prague is calling. Send help. The second part of the report is the one that makes Patton's knuckles turn white. It's a direct, unvarnished confirmation from Eisenhower as headquarters. The Soviets have officially protested any American movement toward the city. Marshal Antonov has warned that any U.S. presence in the Prague sector will be viewed as a hostile breach of agreement. Stalin isn't just asking for the line to be respected anymore. He is threatening a diplomatic and potentially military implosion of the alliance. You can see the tragedy of it in Patton's eyes. He is a man who believes in the warrior's code, and to him, abandoning an uprising is a stain on the soul. But he is also a soldier. For the first time in the entire campaign, the relentless momentum of the Third Army hits a wall that isn't made of Tiger tanks or concrete bunkers. It's made of paper, signed by men in suits thousands of miles away. Patton is forced to halt, but he doesn't do it quietly. While the Red Army finally pours into Prague, liberating the city, but simultaneously beginning a 40-year occupation, Patton's men find themselves at the Enns River and the demarcation line. Here, the two greatest armies the world has ever seen finally come face to face. Imagine the scene. You are an American GI, lean and exhausted after months of sprinting across Europe. Across a narrow bridge or a stretch of muddy field, you see them. The Red Army. They aren't the polished, uniform force you saw in newsreels. They are rugged, many riding on horse-drawn carts alongside T-34 tanks, their uniforms a patchwork of wool and grit. The initial meetings are a chaotic mix of celebration and extreme tension. There are toasts with rotgut vodka and liberated cognac. There are bear hugs and exchanges of cigarettes. But behind the smiles of the frontline soldiers, the officers are playing a much deadlier game. Stalin's orders to his commanders are crystal clear. Maintain a posture of strength. Do not let the Americans see any weakness. And keep a constant eye on Patton. Stalin's respect for Patton was born out of a dark sort of kinship. Stalin didn't respect Eisenhower's penchant for consensus or Montgomery's slow, deliberate caution. He respected force. He understood a man who wanted to keep fighting until there was no one left to fight. In Stalin's mind, Patton was the only Western general who fought like a Russian with a total, almost mystical devotion to the offensive. During a victory banquet, Soviet Marshal Vasily Sokolovsky leans into an American officer and asks, quite seriously, "Is it true that General Patton is planning to attack us?" The American laughs it off as a joke. Sokolovsky doesn't laugh. To the Soviets, the idea isn't a joke. It's a mathematical probability. They have seen Patton's Third Army move. They know that if Patton were given the order, he wouldn't stop at the Elbe. He would be in Warsaw in a week. But as the war in Europe officially ends on May 8, 1945, the tension doesn't dissipate, it hardens. Patton is appointed as the military governor of Bavaria, and it is here that his threat to the Soviet advance takes on its most dangerous form. He begins to do something that sends shockwaves all the way to the Kremlin. He stops disarming the German prisoners of war. Stalin receives the intelligence report and nearly drops his pipe. Patton is keeping entire German divisions organized, fed, and most terrifyingly armed. To Stalin, this is the ultimate betrayal. He believes Patton is building a foreign legion of veteran Wehrmacht soldiers to act as the vanguard for a surprise attack on the Red Army. The cowboy isn't just a fast general anymore. He is actively preparing for World War III. And as Patton's rhetoric becomes more public and more vitriolic, Stalin realizes that as long as George S. Patton is in Germany, the Soviet Union can never truly feel secure in its new conquests. The question in the Kremlin changes from "where is Patton?" to "how do we stop him?" June 1945. Bad Tis, Bavaria. The war in Europe has been over for a month, but if you walked into the headquarters of the Third Army, you wouldn't know it. There is no victory slouch here. The boots are still shined to a mirror finish, and the atmosphere is thick with a new, sharper kind of tension. Patton sits at a mahogany desk, his jaw set like granite. He is looking at reports of Soviet expansion into Poland, Hungary, and the Balkans. To him, the peace isn't a resolution. It's a pause. He begins to voice what the diplomats in Washington are too afraid to whisper: "We have defeated the wrong enemy." In the Kremlin, these words don't just echo, they vibrate. Stalin's intelligence network, the most pervasive in the world, is feeding him direct quotes from Patton's private dinners. Stalin reads the transcripts where Patton suggests polishing off the Red Army while the Patton's transcripts where Patton suggests polishing off the Red Army while the Redness the string reads the transcripts where Patton suggests U.S. still has its full strength in Europe. Stalin takes these threats with deadly seriousness because he knows Patton is a man of action, not a bureaucrat. He sees Patton keeping German administrative structures intact in Bavaria. He hears reports of Patton inspecting German Panzer Division's men who are still in uniform, still drilling, still organized. To Stalin, this looks like the birth of Operation Unthinkable, the British-led plan to launch a surprise attack on the Soviet Union using rearmed German troops. He believes Patton is the one man crazy enough and capable enough to actually pull the trigger. He is a firebrand, Stalin tells his inner circle. And a firebrand in a room full of gunpowder is a danger to everyone. The pressure on Eisenhower becomes unbearable. Stalin's diplomats hammer the Americans. Why is Patton still in command? Why are the Germans not being disarmed? Does the U.S. intend to honor the Yalta Agreement, or is Patton the true face of American policy? You can feel the walls closing in on old blood and guts. Patton is a man built for the lightning war, but he is drowning in the swamp of post-war politics. He refuses to play the game. When ordered to prioritize denazification, he famously snaps that The Nazi thing is just like a Democratic and Republican election fight. It's the final straw. It's exactly the opening Stalin needs to neutralize the American general he fears most. Under immense pressure from both the Kremlin and a war-weary Washington, Eisenhower finally does what the German Wehrmacht couldn't. He stops George Patton. In October 1945, Patton is stripped of his command of the Third Army, his beloved Third, and reassigned to the 15th Army, a paper unit tasked with writing a history of the war. It is a professional exile, a warrior without a war. But as Patton prepares to leave his post, he makes a chilling prophecy to his staff. He tells them that by the time they realize he was right about the Soviets, it will be too late. He plans to go home to the United States and take the lid off the whole situation. He plans to tell the American public exactly what he saw and exactly what he thinks of the Red Menace. Stalin, however, has a long memory and a very long reach. He knows that a retired Patton with a platform is just as dangerous as a Patton with a tank division. And then, on a cold December morning in 1945, on a quiet road in Mannheim, the momentum of George Patton comes to a sudden, violent, and highly suspicious halt. December 9, 1945, 11:45 hours. A narrow road in Mannheim, Germany. The sky is a flat, oppressive gray. The war has been over for 7 months, but the landscape is still a graveyard of twisted metal and shattered dreams. General George S. Patton Jr. is sitting in the back of his 1938 Cadillac Model 75, heading out for a pheasant hunt. For a man who lived his life at 80 miles per hour, the car is moving at a crawl barely 20 miles per hour. You can almost feel the mundanity of the moment. No artillery, no screaming Stukas. Just the low hum of the engine and Patton looking out the window at the ruins of a continent he helped liberate. "How awful war is," Patton remarks, looking at the piles of debris. Then, in a fraction of a second, the world snaps. A 2.5-ton army truck, appearing out of the mist, suddenly veers left to enter a supply depot. It's a low-speed collision, a fender bender, by any military standard. But the physics are cruel. Patton is thrown forward, his head slamming into the clock on the back of the driver's seat. Visual, a slow-motion reconstruction of the impact, the jarring thud, the shattered glass, and the sudden, terrifying stillness of the general. The man who had survived the mud of the Meuse Argonne, the desert heat of North Africa, and the frozen hell of the Bulge is paralyzed from the neck down. As news of the accident reaches the Kremlin, the atmosphere is not one of mourning, but of intense, calculated scrutiny. Stalin's inner circle is skeptical. In the world of Soviet politics, accidents don't happen to people as inconvenient as George Patton. To this day, historians and whistleblowers like Steven Skubik have whispered of the NKVD's hand in that crash of a targeted assassination, to silence the man who wanted to start World War III before the first one was even cold. Whether it was a tragic fluke or a Soviet operation, the result for Stalin was the same. The greatest threat to his westward expansion had been neutralized. Patton would linger for 12 days in a hospital bed, his mind sharp but his body a prison. He died on December 21, 1945. Image: the grave of General George S. Patton Jr. at the Luxembourg American Cemetery, surrounded by his men. Stalin could finally breathe. With Patton gone, the cowboy element was removed from the American military. The U.S. began a massive demobilization, sending its veteran divisions home and leaving a power vacuum in Europe that the Red Army was more than happy to fill. The Iron Curtain, which Patton had seen being forged in the heat of his 1945 advance, finally locked into place. But why did Stalin take him so seriously? Because Stalin was a realist. He knew that while other generals followed orders, Patton followed momentum. Stalin understood that Patton wasn't just a general. He was a force of nature that didn't recognize demarcation lines or diplomatic niceties. If Patton had been allowed to keep driving in April 1945, the map of the 20th century wouldn't have been drawn in a conference room in Yalta. It would have been drawn by the treads of the Third Army's tanks. Stalin took Patton seriously because Patton was the only man in the West who looked at the Soviet Union and didn't see an ally to be appeased, but a rival to be outrun. In the end, Patton's relentless speed ensured that the West held on to at least half of Europe. But his sudden silence ensured that Stalin would keep the rest for nearly half a century. The race was over. The Cold War had begun.